In previous situations, we've been faced with the need to call an object from another object. For example, in the enter event of the enter %2 web panel, we're calling the increase flight prices procedure with the call method. The syntax of calls allows us to omit the call and the operation will be exactly the same, because Genexus has the intelligence to detect that we're calling an object. So, we'll delete the dot and the call. Remember that when we call an object, we can include data that we have in the calling object, for the object called to know them and use them. In this example, we're passing on to the procedure the value of the percentage entered by the user in the web panel that is stored in the percentage variable. In this case, we have the value in a variable. If it were in an attribute, we would include the corresponding attribute inside the parentheses. Or if we had to pass on two or more values, we would send attributes and/or variables separated with commas. As we've seen, in the object called, we declare the data received in the parm rule. In this rule, we can see the percentage variable between parentheses. In this object, we've defined the variable with the same name and data type as it is known within the web panel. The name could have been different, but the data type must be the same. We should remember that the variable received with the percentage value is used in the source of the procedure. If we do not include data when we call an object, then we don't have to declare a parm rule in the object called. If we include more than one piece of data, they will have to be received within the parm rule in the same order and separated by commas. Let's see an example of this. We will define a web panel for the user to enter a start and end range of names of attractions to be listed. From the web panel, we call a procedure to list all the attractions with names included in the range. We'll select New Object, choose Web Panel, and name it Enter Attraction Name Range. Press Create. Then we go to the Variables section to create the two variables we need. We define the name of the variable, Attraction Name From. And the suggestion is to base the definition of the variable on that of the attraction name attribute. This means that the definition of the variable is related to the definition of the attribute, and if in the future we change the data type of the attribute, the data type of the variable will change accordingly and automatically. We will define one more variable named AttractionName2 of the same type. Now we go to the form. From the toolbox, we insert a table and maintain the default size. In web design, it's important to use tables so that what we write or insert in the screen is duly aligned. In this cell, we type attraction name from, and in this other cell, attraction name to. And we enter the variables we've just defined. We also insert a button. And for a moment, we leave the web panel as it is, to now solve the procedure we will be calling in the event associated with the button. In the folder view window, we have the attractions report procedure. So we right-click and select Save As. We call it Attractions Report 2 and get a copy where we will do some changes. We delete the order and the where. This way, the list will print all the attractions. Now let's see the layout. It contains 3 print blocks. This one prints the title of the report. This one prints the title of columns. And this is the only one containing attributes, which will print inside the for each. Let's go back to the source, where we will see that the for each command contains only the invocation to the attractions print block. We now define that this procedure will receive the start and end range of names of attractions, and we will use the data received to filter in the for each. We now go to the variables section of the procedure and define two variables, name from, based on the attribute attraction name, and name to, also based on the attraction name attribute. Note that we have named the variables differently regarding the names defined in the web panel. What's most important is that the data types sent and received match. We now go to the rules section in the procedure and write parm ampersand name from comma ampersand name to. These variables we receive in the procedure will be used to filter in the for each. So we go back to the source and write where attraction name greater than name from, enter, and where attraction name less than name to. Because the procedure was saved upon a previous one, the properties and the rule necessary to print in PDF format are already set. With this, the procedure is ready, and all we need is to call it from the web panel. We go to the web panel and double-click on the button to see the associated event. We then insert the name of the procedure, attractions report to. And next to the procedure name, we add parentheses, inside which we'll include the data we want to send, separated by a comma. Here the variables are called attraction name from and attraction name to, so we will send them with these names. Inside the parentheses, we type ampersand and select attraction name from, then type a comma and ampersand again and select attraction name to. The call to the procedure is now complete, where we have sent the range of names of attractions that the user typed in the form of these two variables. If we go to the procedure, the parm rule receives two variables. The data sent in the first place comes first, and then follows the other data as it arrives in the object called in the order it was sent. We must insist on the fact that it isn't the name of the variables that matters, but rather their order. It's always convenient to use related names as we did here so as to better understand the code. We use the values received in the variables to filter in the for each. Note that we use the names of the variables defined in this procedure and not those used in the calling object. Let's see how all this functions. Press F5. We execute the web panel, enter attraction name range. We want to see the attractions with names starting from A to Z. We press the button, and we see that all attractions have been listed. We now reduce the range a little, from A to F, and we see that only the Eiffel Tower and the Egyptian pyramids come up. At runtime, we've seen a call from one object to another, sending two parameters to the object called. The data received was used to filter in the for each command. We will now explore another possible way to call procedure objects or data providers in particular. In this example, we're calling a procedure called getDiscount. Note that prior to the call to the procedure, there is a variable and an equal sign. This is because the object called returns a value. To the left of the equal sign, there may be a variable to receive such value or depending on its object and section, there could be an attribute receiving the value. In this case, we are not interested in seeing details of what the getDiscount procedure does. Given the name of the procedure, and the fact that it returns a value and the name of the variable that receives the value returned by the procedure, we can conclude that the procedure will return a discount, two pieces of data are sent to the procedure, a customer identifier and a flight identifier, and the procedure will use that data and assess and calculate whatever is necessary to return a discount. It is now important that we see how the parm rule is declared in the object called when the object returns a value in the syntax of that call. In the rules section of the getDiscount procedure, we declare this parm rule with these parameters. We use the term parameters to make reference to data sent and received between two objects where one object calls the other one. This way, we'll be able to talk in general, regardless of whether we send or receive variables, attributes, or fixed values. Now let's see how this works. The two parameters sent are received in order, and the third parameter defined in the parm rule corresponds to the one that stores the value returned in the discount variable of the invocation. So, in the source of the getDiscount object, in some place in the group of instructions, we will have to assign a value to the discount variable for that value to be returned and assigned to the variable located to the left of the equal sign. We've previously called a data provider object like this. This statement assigns to the customers variable, defined as a collection of customers, what the data provider customers returns. In this case, no parameters are sent to the object called because the parentheses contain nothing inside. Therefore, the data provider called has no parm rule declared. Remember that when we drag the source of this data provider, the SDT that we wanted to load, the output property of the data provider was automatically completed with the name of the SDT that we dragged. As described by the name of the output property, what is returned is now configured in the object, that is, the output of the data provider. This is why, in data provider objects, we have to receive in the parm rule the same number of parameters sent in the call, without adding an extra return parameter at the end, because the output is defined by the output property of the data provider. To round off, we will see one last thing. In this example, some parameters are variables and others are attributes. How do we select what to send and what to receive? When sending data to an object that is called, there are no doubts possible. If the data is in an attribute, the attribute is included as parameter, and if it is in a variable, the variable is used. An example where we have the data in attributes is the case where the call to the getDiscount procedure is defined in a rule of a transaction, where the user has entered a customer identifier and a flight identifier, and the values to be sent to the procedure are in attributes. Another example of using attributes could be when the call itself is defined in a for each that navigates a given base table, it has in its scope the corresponding extended table and has those attributes available. An example where we had the data in variables was in the Enter Attraction Name Range web panel, where we entered a range of attractions, and upon confirming, we invoked a procedure sending that range, which is included in two variables. Remember that here we can omit the call. As for starting the parm rule in the object invoked, we can decide for each parameter received whether we will state an attribute or a variable regardless of how it was sent. What's the difference between using a variable or an attribute in the parm rule of the object invoked? If we receive the value in a variable, it may be used freely in programming, as a filter condition for equality, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. It may be used for some arithmetical operation, or whatever we may need to do with it. If we receive the value in an attribute, it'll automatically act as filter for equality in the object. Let's see this. Let's save a copy of this procedure with a different name. We call it attractions report 3. In this new object, instead of receiving two variables containing a start and end value of attraction names, we will receive one single variable with an attraction identifier, whose data we want listed. That means that the idea here is to list the data of a single attraction. We go to the parm rule, remove these two variables, and write ampersand attraction ID. While we're at it, we change the name of the PDF file to attractions report 3. We now go to the variable section and define the variable attraction ID, and then change the for each filters in the source. It's clear that with this definition, we're listing the data of an attraction received by parameter. Now let's see what happens if, instead of receiving the attraction identifier in a variable, we receive it in its attribute name. When we receive the value in an attribute in the rule, Genexus will filter for equality. That is, only the records with that attraction identifier value will be accessed, in all the accesses to the database that take place in the object source. Therefore, it won't be necessary to write this where clause, since the effect of filtering by that attribute is achieved when receiving in the attribute in the parm rule. We then delete this line. If we want to see the navigation of this object, we will see that it's doing the filtering even when the where clause is not written. If we write it, we won't get an error, but there's no need to write it. We've now seen two ways of filtering the information accessed for equality. If our objective is not to use a value received to filter for equality, then the only solution possible is to receive the values in variables to use them freely.